Hey everybody, welcome back. We're talking about linear intercepts. Let's jump in. So when we have a graph of a line, remember that's the root word of linear, that we have a line, there are two things that we can always find. We can see if it has an x-intercept, which means that's where it hits the x-axis. And we can see if it has a y-intercept, which is where it will hit the y-axis, and those values are always on the line. If it doesn't hit the line, if it's parallel to one of those lines, it will not have an x or y-intercept. So find the x-intercept and the y-intercept of 2x plus 7y equals 28. So one of the things that you'll notice up here is where it hits the x-axis, what is the y value? So the x-intercept, we see that this is 3, right? And that point for the y value is 0. So if it's 3 comma 0, we know, what do we notice about the y value? That the x-intercept happens when the y equals 0. And conversely, for the y-intercept, when it's on the y-axis, we call this point 0, 6. And that's because it's when the x equals 0. So let's take that knowledge, knowing that the y-axis is when x equals 0, and the x-intercept is when the y equals 0, and use it over here. So if I'm going to look for the x-intercept, I'm just going to write down that's when y equals 0. So if I take this function, and I take y, and I plug in 0, that tells me that 7 times y is, when it's 0, is just 0. So I end up with 2x equals 28. I can solve for x by dividing by the 2, and we get the x-intercept is 14. So the x-intercept is 14. Same idea for the y-intercept. So when we're talking about the y-intercept, I want to know when the x value equals 0. So instead of x, I'm going to plug in 0 to find the y. So again, if you've made a switch, you won't get the letter that you want in the end. So I'm looking for the y-intercept. I want the y to be left there. I plug in 0 for x. 2 times 0 is just 0. It's gone. So we get 7y equals 28. Solve for y. We divide by 7. And we get y equals 4. So the y-intercept is when y equals 4. If I wanted to graph that, when when the y-intercept is 4, it'd be on the y-axis like that. And when the x-intercept is 14, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Looks like that. And then we go this way. And there's our line. Okay, how about this one? If I'm graphing the equation, now remember, this equation is not in one of those forms that we like to see. It's in what we call standard form. Remember, standard form is ax plus by equals c. So it's in standard form, so it's not in point slope form, right? It's not in that form that we want to use. It's not in slope intercept form, it's in standard form. Well, the easiest way to do this is to find the x and y intercepts. So remember, again, x-intercept is when the y equals 0, and the y-intercept is when what equals 0? The x. So if I'm looking at this, one of the easiest ways to do it is to literally take your finger and cover up the one that you're going to plug in for 0. So I'm literally, so if I'm looking for x, the x-intercept, I know the y is going to be 0, so I know whatever is attached to it is going to be 0. So I'm literally going to like take my finger, pretend like my finger's over it, I'm covering this up. That tells me that x equals 4. So our x-intercept is 4. If I go back and I look at it, I'm looking for the y-intercept this time. So I know I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So I'm going to cover up with my finger. You can use your finger right now. Cover up what the x is. So I'm left with 2y equals 4. Okay, you could also plug in the value like we did before, but I'm showing you a quicker, easier way. Divide both sides by 2, and we get y equals 2. And then now, when I graph it, if this is 2 and this is 4, we get when x is 4, so we put our dot on x is 4 on the x-axis, and our y-intercept is 2 when it's on the y-axis, and then we connect our points. Okay? All right, example number 3, identify the x and y-intercept. So this is pretty easy. To identify the x-intercept, we look at the x-axis. So where it crosses the x-axis is right here. And we count that out. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is when x equals 4. So the x-intercept equals 4. And it's at the point 4, 0. For the y-axis, or the y-intercept, it's on the y-axis. So it's right here. We count up. So that's 1. Here's 2. So the y-intercept equals 2. And it's at the point 0, 2. So here's your key concept. Are you ready? The y-intercept is the value, we'll call it any value of b, because that's what we call it in slope-intercept form. And if the value is b, it's always at the point 0, whatever b is, because it's on the y-axis when x equals 0. Same thing here. For the x-intercept, we always look for where it hits the x-axis. The value is, we'll call this, whatever that value is, a. And the point is at 0, a, because the y always equals 0 on the x-intercept. And again, this is the y-intercept because it hits the y-axis. That's it for today. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.